And welcome back. And as was mentioned, the second part of our show for today is going to be focusing on, of course, the events that unfolded in the South with the Northern Territorial Volunteers. We've been joined at this time by Major Lloyd Jones, who's going to be sharing his perspective on this particular issue. Good morning.
Good morning and welcome.
It's good to be here.
All right. Now, you were on one of the first treks, thank you, with the Belize Territorial Volunteers. But before we move into the discussion, we do have an interview that was conducted yesterday with a reporter, Mike Redunn. Now, he was on the scene to be able to get all the commentary and understand exactly what took place. So we have the expedition leader, Giovanni de la Fuente, and he gave this interview yesterday to the media. So we're going to have that interview to be able to set the backdrop for this discussion as well. So let's take a look at that.
All right. Giovanni, could we start with basically the information, what happened, where you all were when the Guatemalan authorities, when you first spotted them, when they detained you, that sort of thing?
Yeah, morning, evening. Listen, I would want to start off to tell the public that this group of volunteers have seen the neglect and abandonment of our borders and monuments. Hence the reason we have embarked on a program to rehabilitate and install plaques on our 3 monuments. 2 have been rehabilitated and 1 is left. This last installation that occurred yesterday occurred at the Gracias a Dios monument in the Toledo district. We traversed up the Sarstone River, installed a plaque with the name Belize on our monument, and upon exiting the Sarstone River, the Guatemalan military approached our boat, ordered us to stop, showed a rope over our boat and embarked to tow us out about half mile out to sea where they had a large Coast Guard vessel that was awaiting us. Due to the size of the waves and the weather, they could not make a transfer. So we steamed on our own power to Livingston, and we spent the night in Livingston. This morning we had some negotiations with the commandant of Livingston, and we were released. There was no charge for the group, absolutely no charge, and the captain was released with no penalty. He only had to sign a document stating that he had accidentally entered a creek for the distance of 100 yards and a time of approximately 5 minutes. So he signed off on that paper because it's the truth. On our way up the river, there are many tributaries and creeks, and he accidentally took one of these creeks for approximately 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, and we covered a distance of approximately 100 yards. And then we noticed we were on the wrong road and we turned back. So that is the truth. And so we agreed that he should sign off on that truth, and then we departed from Livingston. But it's a shame and disgrace when civilians have to take up the duty of what should be the authorities. It is not our duty to be installing plaques on these monuments. But when a Belizean looks at the state of affairs around these areas, the Guatemalans are encroaching on our territory daily. We have felt it that we have to perform these duties, and we do not perform them on our own. We always properly notify the authorities. And matter of fact, on this particular expedition, we invited the Prime Minister, the Minister of National Security, as well as the Guatemalan ambassador, to be guest speakers at our installation ceremony. And of course, we did not receive a response from any.
Now we understand that there is some anger from members of the group that the BDF did not escort you guys to the border point. Were they asked to provide an escort?
They were asked to Okay, the Minister of National Security was invited to be a guest speaker at this ceremony. At no point in time did we ask the BDF to escort us to this particular point. The Minister of National Security was informed through a hand-delivered registered mail. The office of the Honorable Prime Minister as well as the Ambassador. That's from the top. From the bottom, we paid visits to the BDF camp in Orinduak Town, explaining to them how many persons would be going, what date, with a specific itinerary. So they knew who was going, at what point of time we should be at what point. And let me tell you that the BDF were a no-show when we arrived at this monument. The Guatemalan military showed up while we were installing the plaques. And they were very, very respectful. They did not try to stop us. And we proceeded with our explanation while we were looking up to an area called Cadenas where the BDF have their post. They were up there and they did not come down, not even to pay us a courtesy call.
Could you describe for us in a nutshell the feeling of the group, one on being detained and two on getting back on Belizean soil?
My brother, it's always good to be back home, and it's good to be around people that still love Belize. And the group isn't wavered. I think their determination has steeled, and they are already speaking about another expedition to this monument called Gabat Falls in the Cayo district. That monument is in a state of disrepair. It's almost falling into the river. It needs to be painted, and there is no plaque on it indicating Belize. Of course, it's not our duty to be installing plaques, and so we invite the government to please take it up and see that these monuments are properly taken care of. You know, brother, it's in the adjacency zone agreements it's called confidence building measures. Both governments have signed off agreeing that they will protect, maintain these three areas that serve as markers between Guatemala and Belize. Tres Banderas, Gabat Falls, and Gracias a Dios. In the adjacency zone agreements, there is an area called confidence building measures where both parties, along with the OAS, should be taking care of these monuments. They are not, and hence the reason you find civilians going to these areas now.
Sir, I think at one point the OAS reported that the rationale for taking you all is that because the Guatemalans felt like you were unsafe on the waters, and that you all pretty much just tried to keep you safe because the waters were rough.
My friend, let me tell you, it's not the function of the Guatemalans to determine our safety. We have a capable captain, and we are back home safely. Each and every person that went is back home safely. We'd like to compliment Mr. Memo for taking us and bringing us back safely, even though we had another area on our itinerary that was not planned, Livingston, but he took us to Livingston under our own power and brought us back safely again. So it's not the Guatemalan duty to decide if we are safe or not.
All right, just to clarify something, you all are saying that the captain, the reason why you all were detained is because for 5 minutes the captain went up a creek earlier in the day. But when you all were taken by the Guatemalan military, you all were in Belizean waters?
Good point. Let me tell you. The report says that 7 o'clock in the morning, we accidentally entered a creek for 5 minutes and traversed 100 yards. We were detained at approximately 5 o'clock in the evening. So we accidentally entered that creek in the morning. 8-9 hours afterwards, while we were exiting the Sarstone River, we were just at the mouth of the Sarstone River. The Guatemalan military pulled up on us, took over the vessel. But of course, there is no presence of Belize in this area, brothers. There is no presence. The Guatemalans basically run this area, fish. You see all of them fishing out there all day long. And we entered what they say is Guatemalan territory for 100 yards. So you do the maths.
Sir, apart from the apparently unreasonable detention, was the experience with while in the custody of the Guatemalan authorities at all unpleasant?
At no point of time did our group endanger any member of the expedition. If any member was exposed to any danger, it was caused by the Guatemalan military that took over our vessel and insisted in high seas that we were to be towed to the Coast Guard vessel that they had parked a half mile off the coast. It was during their towing that we were being slammed, water in the boat, that the captain memo insisted that if we were to be towed, we would sink. And he insisted that they remove the tow rope and that we would steam to the vessel under our own power. At that point, 2 more Guatemalan military jumped into the boat. They took off the rope and instructed him to steam to the vessel. When we got to the vessel, it was almost a collision. And they realized that in these high seas, you cannot make a successful transfer. We have elderly folks on board. At what point, they instructed us to steam on our own power to Livingston.
Very interesting recounting of the details of the day. What's your initial reaction? Let's go back first, Major Jones, to when you first heard that this situation was actually on the way. What was your initial reaction?
Well, my view is the same as it was then, that I thought that this was just another attempt by Guatemala to bully us. Now, having heard the interview, I'm even more convinced of that fact. In essence, the actions or the reactions of the Guatemalans were not warranted by the circumstances. Those people who put to sea understand that you make navigational errors from time to time, whether those are caused by the weather or equipment failure or a lack of knowledge on the part of mariners. So this appears to be an instance where the captain got a little bit disoriented, quickly realized that he had made an error and corrected it right away. What interests me is the fact that they were detained some while after, but also the point where they were detained, clearly in Belizean waters from what we just heard. So in one instance, you have a civilian who made an error in navigation, entered Guatemalan territory for a brief moment. The reaction of the Guatemalan were to send their military into our territorial waters. Completely different scenario. If for example, if a Guatemalan strays into Belize and quickly corrects his error, our Coast Guard would not be so crazy as to detain them. You made an error, you know, we correct you, and then you go on.
And that was one of the things you were explaining to us, that it is something that is understood in terms of territorial waters.
Yes.
That you may, without knowledge, end up in an area you shouldn't be. What is it called?
Well, the right of innocent passage is it's an accepted maritime principle that you can traverse the territorial waters of any country, so long as that voyage is expeditious. You don't stop or you don't do harm to the country. That's a common understanding in the maritime field. From all those perspectives, it would tell me that the Guatemalans wanted to show us who was the boss, really. And a great part of the problem is that this river, which is the border between our countries, is pretty much abandoned by us as Belizeans. So, for example, what we have along the Sarstool is a larger, wealthier neighbor putting a checkpoint on a one-way street. Right? So if you live on the street and your neighbor decides, I'll put a roadblock here, you don't say nothing. And every time you go on the street, he wants to check your papers and wants your license. And this is what the Guatemalans have been doing along the Sarstool. Every time you enter they come and they want to know what are you going to do here and so on, and you're a Belizean, and they come across the river. They come into Belize, the Belizean side of the river. Now the argument might very well be that we have not properly demarcated the border. So that might be the argument.
But doesn't the adjacency zone kind of principle also apply there?
Well, see, you would have to come to agreement.
So there's nothing...
As far as I know, there's no agreement as to how we are going to delimit the river. So, and there are several ways you can do it. One is the median principle, which is equidistance halfway, right? The other is what is called the Talweg doctrine, or the deepest part of the river. So you would have to agree what that is. And depending on what you agree, that also has implications for your territorial waters. Because at the point where the river enters the sea, if that shifts, so does your territorial waters, your internal waters, because it is from that point that you measure internal waters. You see, so it depends on what you agree on. And in this case, for example, if you go with the median principle, it means that the island that we say is ours, approximately half of it would go to Guatemala. If you go with the Talweg doctrine, the deepest part of the channel, then that entire island belongs to us, because the deepest part of the channel goes south of the island. You see? And the Guatemalans have been exerting sovereignty over that piece of territory. They have people living on the island. Every so often we have to go and ask them to leave. They establish fishing huts. They run nets across the river. They do all these things in the river.
Now, the question that begs asking, because within that interview, one of the things that they kept repeating, or he kept repeating, and I think it was a recurrent theme over all the interviews, that there was not a BDF presence to go into that area, even though they had informed the BDF that they were going. Is that a point that is worth investigating further? Because especially given the fact that you've said that basically we've abandoned that area, but yet it is Belizean territory. So should there have been the need for a BDF escort?
Well, I think what happens is that we have been slowly moving away from the border. We have moved the BDF away from the border. All the border military outposts that were created by the British, we have effectively abandoned. So when the British were in charge, they had what we call observation posts all along the border, so that they can, and those posts were in proximity to Guatemalan military bases, so that they could monitor the activities of those. If you see, for example, huge buildup of troops and so on, that tells you where something is going on. So you would have people 24 hours a day at those observation posts.
Which is military due diligence.
Correct, correct. So what has happened is that we have drifted away from those, because most of those were in the adjacency zone, you see? So we have drifted away from those. Along the Sarstoon, there is an observation post called Cadenas that overlooks the Guatemalan military base in Modesto Mendez. And so the BDF would send patrols up there to change over the troops and so on. But that is occasional. The Guatemalans have a permanent base at the mouth of the river, you see. And I think that is where we are having difficulties, because we have said basically, we don't mind we are, we can put it that way, you see. And it leads to this kind of behavior by the Guatemalans.
Now, one of the things that has been, if I reflect on when the Belize Territorial Volunteers first started to take treks to the border, one of the concerns expressed, I believe at the time, by the Minister of Foreign Affairs was this very same issue. That because you have civilians going into an area where there's not you don't see a white line like you see on a football field that says this is the other side of the border, and there would be some risks involved. Is this, and especially when you're talking about a river specifically, it would be very difficult to tell. Is there any way that the group itself could have been able to monitor their own progression into the area and ensure that they didn't move over the border?
Yes, I mean, modern technology, GPS allows you to do all of these things. So I think an important part of it would have to be the planning. When we're going along the border, we do proper planning, we take the right equipment and so on, and then you try and take somebody who is knowledgeable about the terrain. I know Memo runs a service to Livingston and to Barrios. I'm not too familiar if how well he knows the Sarsoon River, but there are lots of inlets, so you've got to be very careful indeed.
Now, one of the questions that sprung to my mind was the idea that there is a huge fear factor, and this just reinforces it, because Belizeans are just wary of going there, just by the reaction of people, you know, when they heard reports, whether they were clear, because you had conflicting, I would say, semantics. They were kidnapped. They were, you know, words of that nature. They were detained. They were taken. You assume there was some hostility involved. What would be the suggestion in such a case in the first place? What do you do if you're accosted by military from Guatemala? Did they do the right thing by just saying, we're going?
Yes, I think that's the proper thing to do indeed. You don't want to resist, because it might lead to somebody coming into harm. But I think that is part of the Guatemalan strategy, to keep us out of the area by intimidating us. You see, they already have succeeded in keeping the BDF out of the area pretty much. Now along comes this bunch of Belizeans saying that this is our territory, and we are going to show you that this is our territory. We recognize that it is ours, and we are going to let you know that is what they are trying to counter now. And when the foreign minister had said that, look, you do so at your own risk by going there, don't expect us to come and look after you, kind of thing. But if the government fails to defend the territory, it's the right and the duty of the citizens to do it. You see, and that is what is happening here. The government has abdicated the responsibility to defend every square inch. And that is, Guatemala exercises de facto sovereignty over the entire Sarsoon River.
So what do you say to Belizeans in general? Because, again, this may potentially become a political football of sorts. Saying that, oh, you went into the area, you provoked this situation with this territorial volunteers thing. Is it a provocation, or is it something that we need to take seriously as citizens, regardless of our political affiliations?
Well, I think that countries should be bigger than partisan politics. And this is, I keep saying to people that the primary duty of the government is the preservation of the state. You know, you can't abandon part of your territory and still say that you're protecting and defending what is ours. That is your duty as a government, you see. So when you look at the way we treat the Guatemalans, for example, in the Chiquibul, when the BDF have orders that if you come across a civilian, you must escort him to the border and allow him to leave. You see the difference in the treatment. Yeah. And these people in the Chiquibul are not making innocent errors into our territory. They're coming to hunt and to look for gold and to rob us.
Extract our resources.
Yes. Unlike this group of Belizeans who were simply going to visit the monument to develop and instill in particularly the younger generation this sense of nationalism, and the reward for that is to be detained and taken to Guatemala. Completely different attitude when you look at how we treat each other. When you come across, they say, look, take them to the border, show them the border, and allow them to leave. You see?
Are you worried about that narrative?
I'm very. And I have been saying this for years, that I don't understand how the government can abandon. This is a very important thing, you know, and because a lot of us live in urban areas, we don't understand and appreciate the importance of every square inch. Because the old saying goes, give them 1 inch and take 1 yard, and that is what has been happening. So now they control the Sarsoon completely. The idea is that no Belizean must go up that river. And when the BDF goes on patrol, the BDF will tell you, many of their reports, that they find Guatemalans on our side of the river. And the instructions from Belmopan is to basically leave them alone. See what you just saw. You understand me? That has been the problem here. Complete abandonment.
Well, on the flip side, this experience obviously shows the grandstanding that takes place from the Guatemalan side. What it has done definitely is to bring awareness of what you are speaking about, and I think I can safely say that the entire nation was paying attention to the situation, and also raising a lot of questions in terms of response. So I want to bring that point in, because there are certain things that can and cannot be done in a situation like that. How do you think the response was to this situation once the group was already at Livingston?
Well, from what I've gathered, our ambassador, Mr. Rosado, was dispatched. Some people complained that it took a while to get there, but he went there to make sure that the people were being treated fairly, that they had accommodations and so on. And I imagine that the general would have been calling his counterparts in Guatemala to say, look, what is the situation here, and how do we resolve this peacefully? And then, of course, the Minister of Foreign Affairs would have been working the back channels discussing this. But I think that what we will see from this is, unless we put pressure on the government, would be that they'll say, well, you're going to look for trouble. You understand me? And citizen protection is a function of the government as well. Look, this in any scenario, the person made a mistake was a simple mistake. They weren't carrying contraband, they never have illegal firearms, they didn't have any of those things. A simple error in navigation. It happens, you see? That is not something that any good neighbor would detain your citizens for. And you should let them know that look, man, when your people make errors in navigation, either, whether at land or sea, we cut them a break. We expect the same courtesies from you. We don't expect this to happen again.
What kind of discussion or exchange of notes do you think the public should expect or bring pressure to bear on the government at this point in terms of the exchange with Guatemala at this point? Because when most people heard the situation, it's almost as if though whatever you do at this point, it's futile. They already have the people. You don't know what will happen, what's your right.
Well, you had some radicals who said have the Coast Guard or BDF go right over there and take them back.
And they don't really work that way.
Yeah, exactly. No, I know. That's why I said some radicals, or fly a helicopter in and get them. But I say that because I think we need to have people understand too that even though the situation as we see it was grandstanding, was unfair, there are rules in terms of how you interact with another country crossing their borders.
Yeah, you would have to, in this case, you would have had to work the diplomatic channels. And that's the importance of having good relations, but good relations can't be a one-sided affair. You see, we extend courtesies to you and your citizens. We expect that you would do the same for us. And it can't be that you will intimidate our citizens from going to visit the border. You see? And the psychological side of this is very important, because when you are fearful of walking your own territory, going and saying to your children, this land belongs to you, that is the effect of what they're doing here, So you can say to the child that the Belize belongs to you, it's 8,867 square miles, but you don't show them. You can't even go into the adjacency zone. So really, does it really belong to you? You see? And so this is what the territorial volunteers are doing. They say, look, this is our land. We're going to go right up to the border because we should be able to do that.
Is that initiative, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion on the national territorial volunteers and whether it's a foolhardy thing. You're just unnecessarily putting yourself at risk. And as Marlene said at the top of this interview, you have taken one of the treks. I think it was a hiking one in your part. Why is it an important undertaking that you would encourage other Belizeans to perhaps latch on to and not see it as foolhardy?
And
I really don't think it's foolhardy at all. I think that we have to demonstrate that this is our territory. As I said before, the government has abandoned that function. And when the government abandons such an important function, we as citizens have to step up. Now, I think we should put a lot more pressure on the government to improve the national security scenario, to deal with Guatemala, to shift away from this policy of appeasement that they seem to have with respect to Guatemala. and put pressure on them to defend every single square inch of our territory. The Guatemalans do it. They are right up on that border, because as soon as you cross, you will know you're in Guatemala.
But we know the response will be resources once again.
Well, resources always seem to be the cry. It's an excuse to get out of performing their duties, quite honestly. We say, oh, we're poor and we don't have money, but we have money for just about every other thing. You see, so we have to set what are the national priorities. That is what we need to do.
So, but this has not been, and I want to get some clarity here, because you made a very valid point. It is post-independence that we've seen this retreat of sorts across successive administrations.
Yep.
So how do we get people or the politicians to understand that this is an administrative duty that we cannot continue to abandon?
I think that, you know, one of the things when we look at the political landscape in Belize, we seem to almost have lost hope as a nation. Seriously. So it's like, no matter what you say to the politician, they want to do what they want anyways. No. You are their bosses, and when we have a problem or an issue, we must bring it to our political leaders. That's why they are there. And when they don't listen to us, well, we must find a way to have them listen to us. And this is what has happened. When we were, the British left here in, I think, about 95 or so, or the early 90s, we could find all of the border cons along the border. There was a little pile of rocks that marked the border. And part of our task on that patrol was to find those markers and to clean them. And then as the British pulled out, then the excuse became resources. Oh, we don't have helicopter. No, but I want to clean that in the next 2 months. And then we only focused later on the 3 main markers. All of those in between, completely gone, right? But when the British were here, that was part of your task. Anytime you were on patrol, border patrol, it meant border patrol. You were on the border looking for the markers and cleaning them, so that anybody walking along that area would be able to find, oops, we know where the boundary is. And so, and I think in 95, when that shift for the BDF came from national defense to police duties, that really messed things up for us. So all our soldiers are in the cities, and nobody is along the border. We sent police to Caracol, and we saw what happened there.
So a reversal of roles.
Yes, it's complete reversal of roles. And people like to say that, look, one, we can't beat Guatemala. We don't want to beat Guatemala. You understand me? That's why it's a defense force. It's a defense mechanism. We're not aggressors. But you can't not be prepared to defend yourself. And when you don't, when you allow your defense force to wither and die, then this is what will happen. And eventually the adjacency zone will go from 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers. In fact, it's all over the Chiquibul right now. You see? And that is what happens. And then people say, well, you're being alarmist, and look, these are the things you can't take your eyes off. You have to stay on it when it comes to territory.
Especially, and I want to shift just for a minute, because you talk about this and then you look globally at issues that are happening with, let's say, Israel and Palestine, and the erection of walls and all of that with territories and stuff. And people may say, well, you know, we don't want that kind of violence necessarily here. But I think what you're underscoring is the fact that we may take it so willy-nilly that, you know, there's an encroachment. When we talk about the invasion is, there is what you've always called the eastward drift.
Yeah.
That continues, and it's in the river, it's in the Chiquibul, it's everywhere, and we are just abdicating that responsibility. So how do we get people to focus on this, and it becomes so that it becomes a national issue, and you're not just sounding an alarm, and people feel as if, oh, well, there's nothing we can do.
Well, it goes back to that sense of hopelessness that I was telling you about. But these problems are best corrected when they are small, you see, because post-independence, the problem started slowly until we reached that crescendo the other day in the Chiquibul, where people were just pouring across, because we failed to deal with it when it was a small issue. And if that meant going to the UN every single time and complaining and complaining and complaining, then do that. Then do that, you see. And this is why I keep saying to people, when you look at all the diplomatic gains that our forefathers achieved in the early to mid 70s and leading up into independence, we've squandered it because the people who are supposed to be looking after us seems more interested in rubbing shoulders with the Guatemalans than defending what is ours. And nothing wrong in being good neighbors, but like I said, you have to ask for reciprocity. I am kind and decent and respectful towards you. I expect it in return, and when I don't get it in return, then you have to hear my mouth. And this is what is happening. Every time something happens, we are the ones who must give a break. Give them a break, give them a break, give them a break. And before you know it, all the way we were living on St. George's Key. Serious.
I want to bring back one issue from what took place over the weekend, because while we have talked about the fact that the boat may have gone into a creek that could have been on Guatemalan side, the closing point, which is talking about the military coming over into Belizean waters to make the interception and to begin the tow. What are the implications of that?
Well, that's a serious, it's a military incursion. You recall when they took the soldiers from along the western border, they used the same argument that they had gone into Guatemala, when in fact it was they who came across and took the soldiers. So if they could have done that to our soldiers and got away and scotch-free, so to speak, what makes you think they don't do it? Yes. What makes you think they won't do it to civilians? And this is what happens when you allow a bully to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and they don't push back. This is what will happen. So it's either you're prepared to defend yourself or you take what you get.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was what came to mind, especially since one of the police officers, Herrera, passed away quite recently. We re-aired the story. 15 years ago, this situation happened at the western border. And it literally took a lot of scheming. And as Belizeans experienced for one day, they experienced for over a week at that time in 2000. And I recall, even after they were snuck out of Guatemala, as had to be done, the ambassador was expelled for that after that incident. So there was a lot of reaction by people. There was the seriousness of the situation, and I was much younger at the time, but I remember it so vividly. The seriousness of the situation was one that you could not miss. Is this something that we need to have this type of reaction for? Yes, we have it somewhat resolved. The Belizeans are back in country, so we have that part to be at ease about. But do we need to be as emotional about the issue?
I don't think we necessarily want to be emotional, but I think we have got to have the kind of conviction to deal with this thing and to deal with it in the proper way. I think the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to lodge a protest of the strongest kind to the Guatemalans, that this is not good neighborliness, if in fact they were concerned about that vessel. But from 7 in the morning until 5, they could have picked up the phone and called the Coast Guard and said, look, Belize, we saw one of your vessels go into the river. We think they might have strayed across. You might want to come and look on this way. That is good neighborliness, you see. But their reaction was to wait until they're back out. And I suspect they probably went to consult with somebody. That is what happened.
Check coordinates.
Yes, they consulted with somebody and said, look, a Belizean boat with these troublesome volunteers just passed. They made a mistake and went up the river. What should we do? And then somebody gave them instructions to do this. And that is why it took so long, you see.
And going back to that point that you made about the exchange of notes that needs to take place. And a lot of times, because it has been suggested that it's good diplomacy to do it and do it quietly. And in this situation, no harm, no foul. Yes, they were detained and inconvenienced, but that's it.
Yeah. No, I think the government must answer to us and to tell us what they're doing. This is what we have done. We have sent a diplomatic note. We have protested in the strongest possible terms. We have demanded whatever it is that they have done, they must tell us, because like I keep saying, they work for us. And we want to know, what are you doing so that this does not happen again? And that can't be, well, don't go up the river, you see, because we have every right to be there, you see. So they have got to fix this problem and to deal with it urgently and in an effective manner.
So I guess that's the point we are at now, actually, to see the reaction as of today and what will be done to make a very clear statement that this type of action done by the Guatemalans is unacceptable to us.
And you see that what tells me that this was sanctioned by somebody very senior is that they even had time to bring in their larger patrol vessel. So it was a well-coordinated effort on their side, you see.
So the delay was really to prepare.
Was really just to prepare. So they had, it wasn't that you made a mistake and you corrected the error in navigation and off you go. They saw you and they said, aha, this is our break now.
To make
And
it.
then exactly.
So they made their statement, so now we must make ours.
That's right.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us this morning and sharing your perspective on what took place this weekend with the Northern Territorial Volunteers. And of course, we'll have a full recap in our newscast tonight, and we will keep following the situation. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue with our mayoral interviews, this time being joined by the PUP mayoral candidate for San Ignacio Santa Elena, Ramon Quiroz. Stay tuned.